Let's talk about a few specific examples on how muscarine acetylcholine receptors work. So these work in the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic side, rest and digest. So there's 5 different subtypes of muscarine acetylcholine receptors. And with 1, 3, and 5, M1, M3, and M5 all being excitatory, whereas M2 and M4 are inhibitory in their nature on how they signal the cell. They're all G protein receptors, and a lot of them work through manipulating potassium channels. So that's what we're going to look at here. Is we have a cell in the smooth muscle of the intestines. Remember, it's rest and digest. It's going to increase GI motility. That's going to increase contraction of the smooth muscle in the GI tract in the intestines. So when muscarine or acetylcholine, when we're talking about our body, muscarine is just a chemical found in mushrooms that also bind to these receptors and have an effect on these receptors. So when acetylcholine binds to it in our body, remember we're in a smooth muscle cell in the intestines, it's going to cause this alpha subunit to slide down. It's after a conformational change here. So let's say acetylcholine binds. It's going to change the G protein shape. It's going to cause a subunit. These should be tied into here. This subunit is going to slide down, and it's going to bind to that potassium channel. Let's say the potassium channel is open, as it is here. It's going to cause it to close. So what happens here is if you trap potassium ions inside that smooth muscle cell, it's going to lead to a depolarization, which will lead to actin and myosin and the contraction of the muscle and all that. So as these positive charges build up in the cell, it depolarizes and you have a contraction, and you're increasing that GI motility through peristalsis and segmentation, the mixing that goes on there. So that is one example of a parasympathetic activity working through. This is an M3 subtype. It's one of the stimulatory ones because it's going to cause depolarization of the cell. On the flip side, let's move over to the heart. Now let's imagine we're at the heart and we're at a pacemaker cell at the sinoatrial node. And it's the rest and digest arm of the autonomic nervous system. So it's gonna, when it binds to this cell, this one's an M2. Remember, M2 subtypes and M4 subtypes are inhibitory. They hyperpolarize the cell as opposed to polarizing the cell. So in this case, it's closed before it binds, it's already closed. So when acetylcholine binds to an M2 receptor in the heart, it's going to cause a conformational change. And instead of the alpha subunit, the beta and gamma subunits are going to break off here and slide down the cell membrane until it gets to the potassium channel, and it's going to open it. Once it binds here, it opens it. Potassium leaves the cell. As positive ions leave the cell, it's going to hyperpolarize that pacemaker cell, and it's going to take longer for it to spontaneously go off again. And that's how the parasympathetic nervous system has an effect on the pacemaker cells. So just to recap this one again, acetylcholine binds to the M2 subtype receptor. You have a conformational change of the G protein that's going to allow this beta and gamma complex to slide down the cell membrane, bind to the potassium channel, open the potassium channel that was previously shut. That's going to allow potassium out of the cell. That's going to hyperpolarize the cell and slow down the heartbeat. It'll have the same effect on contractility cells, so it'll decrease the contractility of the heart as well. So that's just a couple examples. Remember, there's 2 different types of acetylcholine receptors, 2 main categories. We have the nicotinic and the muscarinic. We're talking about muscarinic here because we're talking about the influence of the parasympathetic nervous system. But remember, nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are found at the neuromuscular junction. They're found at the autonomic ganglia, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. So where the preganglionic fibers meet the postganglionic fibers in the ganglia, That's also nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. But when we're talking about parasympathetic on the actual organs and the effect it has there, it's always muscarinic acetylcholine receptors at that point. Thanks.
To learn more about the human body, subscribe, turn on those post notifications, give this video a big thumbs up. Bye.